June 22nd, 1944, Arizona. The wheels crushed the hard crust of alkali flats with a steady, brittle cracking sound, like chewing through a pile of sun-scorched bones. Italian Corporal Enrico Rossi lay curled beneath the canvas cover of the transport truck, sweat running down the groove of his spine and blooming dark maps across his coarse uniform. The cloth above him trapped heat. The air under the tarp smelled of dust, canvas, and bodies that had been traveling too long. He closed his eyes. In the darkness, he could almost see the contours of hills back home, but the image was immediately replaced by the groan of metal plates swelling under the desert sun. The truck's frame complained with every seam in the road. Then he noticed the quiet. Aside from the engine's moan, the axles' squeal, and the stifled breathing of the men around him, there was almost nothing else to hear. No dense artillery blanket, no dive bomber shriek, not even the chaotic, lively shouting of Sicilian villages. The quiet here was something different, a vast humming, as if heat had vacuumed the world hollow and left behind only a single note that never stopped. The truck stopped. The canvas flap was yanked up. Light hit like a solid, scalding wall. Enrico clamped his eyes shut on instinct. His vision burned white. Hot wind poured in at once, carrying fine sand that rasped across his face. He blinked hard and forced his eyes open. The first thing he saw was not people, but a few motionless black dots on the far horizon, guard towers, like periods placed with a ruler and a hard pencil on a drawing too flat and too bright. The sky was a washed-out, almost faded blue. No clouds, no smoke. Too clean, too empty. Out, line up by number. The ground was gray-white and powdery underfoot. The air went into the lungs hot, as if he were inhaling from a stove. Their small group of Italian prisoners, about 20 men, was led toward a fenced area of barbed wire, low barracks, and a few enormous warehouses. Everything looked drained of color. Barracks painted pale yellow, baked nearly white, sand the color of ash. Even shadows shortened and thinned by the vertical light. Sound returned in fragments, worn smooth by wind, faint metal striking somewhere, an engine idling with a soft chuffing, and with a regularity that felt almost indifferent, a bell tone from a loudspeaker, clang, clang, clang. A mess bell, a schedule bell. Enrico could not tell. The bell did not sound like a village church. It sounded like a factory, telling bodies when to move. They were stopped, checked, counted. Numbers were called. Names were written down. Enrico watched a clerk's pencil move across paper as if the page mattered more than the man standing in front of it. A guard corrected the spacing between them with a palm to a shoulder, not cruel, simply efficient. Somewhere a gate clicked. Somewhere a tower shadow shifted by an inch. He was quickly assigned to mechanical repair and logistics maintenance. A bespectacled civilian with fast speech wrote his name into a thick binder and marked a code beside it. After a brief physical check, Enrico received a set of coarse work clothes in a color close to the barracks. The tasks sounded straightforward. repair water pumps on farm tractors, handle minor faults on Army trucks, maintain irrigation equipment, work for wrenches, screwdrivers, and patience. It was also work that required hands, and the camp knew it. The young lieutenant responsible for escorting their work detail held his jaw tight, his brown uniform sharply pressed. Beside him stood another man in a grease-stained khaki shirt with sleeves rolled to the elbows, his face weathered a reddish brown from years outdoors. Frank, the American foreman of the contracted workshop, Frank's hands looked like they had lived inside machines. He spoke with the clipped confidence of someone paid to deliver results. Their work site was a half-open maintenance shed near the camp's edge, still within view of the wire. Under the roof lay stacks of farm machines awaiting repair, tractor parts, pumps, belts, cans of grease, crates of bolts. The air smelled of motor oil, metal, and hot sand. A fan turned lazily in one corner, pushing hot air from one place to another. As Enrico followed the line toward the shed entrance, the lieutenant stopped. "Per regulations," the lieutenant said evenly, without inflection, as if reciting text, "entry into open work areas carries a low but non-zero escape risk. All personnel will back to the rail and be cuffed." He nodded toward a sturdy metal bar at the shed's edge. The prisoners exchanged brief looks and moved in silence. Enrico turned and reached his wrist behind him, waiting for the familiar cold ring of metal to close. He had been through this many times. It was part of war, the physical footnote of the word prisoner. The body learned to anticipate the bite of steel. "Hold on," it was Frank. He stepped forward, positioning himself between the lieutenant and the prisoners, eyes moving over the waiting wrists and then settling on the lieutenant. "Lieutenant, I understand the rule, but people working here need their hands, steady hands." He picked up a large, adjustable wrench from the bench and weighed it. With cuffs on, even tethered to a bar, movement changes. Leverage goes off. You strip a valve, or the wrench slips and breaks a foot, that's lost time and an injury report. Then the commander asks why the shop is behind schedule and why the safety record cracked. The lieutenant's jawline tightened. "Mr. Frank, my responsibility is to prevent escape and unauthorized movement. In a non-fully enclosed environment, this is standard procedure." Frank's voice stayed level. "My responsibility is to get machines repaired efficiently and without incidents. If the labor assigned to me cannot do fine work, the work does not get done. Tractors down means delays in the camp's own farm output. That is risk too." Enrico stood with his back to them, arms already beginning to ache. He could feel old bruises on his wrists, rubbed raw by rough cuffs, flaring with dull pain at the thought of more pressure. Sweat slid down his temple into his eye, stinging. He did not dare wipe it away. The standoff used his body as a prop for two forms of authority he could not enter. He was just a number, waiting for whichever definition of safety won. A third voice cut in, not loud, but clean enough to pierce the heat. "Lieutenant, Mr. Frank, pause." A sergeant approached, older than the lieutenant, his face carved by wind, sand, and time into something hard and calm. There was little decoration on his uniform, but his gait and the way he looked at people carried the steady authority of long practice. He did not address the dispute first. His eyes went to the prisoners' faces, pausing on Enrico's sweat-soaked forehead and trembling arms, as if those details were part of the scene that had to be read before anything else. "Medic," the sergeant said, gesturing. A soldier with a medical bag jogged over at once. "Check them for dehydration, especially the wrists, old injuries, new abrasion." The medic worked quickly, signaling Enrico to turn, checking pulse and eyelids, then lifting Enrico's wrist to inspect the purplish ring of bruising and broken skin. The medic's fingers were dry and professional. While pressing and examining, he asked softly in accented Italian, "Does it hurt?" Enrico blinked, surprised that his language had survived the truck ride and the shouting, and shook his head. He did not know whether that was truth or habit. The medic finished and reported in English, "Mild dehydration. Wrists show old compression and friction injury. Recommend fluids and avoid sustained pressure." The sergeant nodded as if the report had resolved an equation. Only then did he step to the lieutenant and hold out his hand, palm up. "Keys, Lieutenant." The lieutenant hesitated as if words might help, as if he could explain that he was following procedure. The sergeant's expression did not change. He repeated the same two words, flat and patient. "Keys." After a moment, the lieutenant unclipped the key ring from his belt and placed it in the sergeant's hand. The handover felt ceremonial without being theatrical, like a tool passed between shifts. The sergeant went to Enrico and signaled him to turn back toward the rail. Metal clicked. The heavy restraint came away and Enrico's wrists loosened. The sudden absence of pressure made the bruised skin throb in the hot air. The sergeant placed the cuffs into a sturdy, light brown canvas bag. Then he pulled a stick of white chalk from his breast pocket, the ordinary kind that squeaks on blackboards, and wrote 2 lines on the tightened mouth of the bag in firm strokes. 22nd of June, 1944, WWR 784. White dust flared bright against brown canvas. He cinched the draw cord and tied a practiced knot that sealed the chalk markings beneath the binding. He handed the sealed bag to another soldier, then spoke to Enrico for the first time, his English blunt and undecorated. "You don't need this here." He turned to the medic. "Water, salted lemon, standard issue." A canteen was passed over, the mouth stuffed with a wrinkled half-slice of lemon. The sergeant put it into Enrico's hands. "Drink it now. That's regulation." Enrico gripped the canteen. The cool metal felt nothing like the cuffs. The water inside was faintly salty and lemon sour. He swallowed and felt his dry throat sting with clarity. He drank in quick, small gulps, eyes fixed on the canvas bag in the other soldier's hands. The date and number looked like a seal, not forgiveness, not favor, a mark that said something had been removed and would not be forgotten. Chalk had always meant lessons to him, a teacher's hand, a slate, a problem that could be erased and tried again. Here it meant the opposite. The date and the number were not meant to fade. Masters tied the knot so the writing sat under the cord like a label on a specimen, protected from rubbing hands and careless weather. Enrico watched the bag carried away and imagined it placed on a shelf, then in a cabinet, then in a room where paperwork outlived heat and anger. Somewhere the cuffs would wait, tagged like a tool, and the reason for removing them would wait with them. Dehydration, abrasion, risk of injury, not mercy, but an instruction. If the camp could store a pair of cuffs with a date, it could store a decision, and later point to it and say this was done and this is why. The thought made him uneasy and oddly steadier at the same time. The lieutenant watched in silence, his expression complicated. Frank let out a small breath, dusted his hands, and turned toward the shed. "All right, tools are over there. We start with that tractor pump. Slow first, then steady." The sergeant said nothing more. He stationed himself at the edge of the shed's shade, pulled out a worn notebook, and began writing. His pencil moved with the same economy as his hands. He wrote while they worked, as if the act of recording was another safeguard against heat, error, and improvisation. Work began. Enrico picked up a wrench. The tool was heavy, but his fingers could open and close freely. Frank showed them the first job, a tractor pump that had been losing pressure, its housing scored, its seal worn down by grit. Enrico listened, nodded, and took the pump apart. With care, he laid parts out in order, cleaned them, and reassembled them as if order could be built one washer at a time. When he set the wrench on the first rusted bolt and leaned into it, the metal scraped with an ugly shriek. He adjusted his stance, tightened his grip, and tried again. The bolt resisted, then gave with a small certain shift. In that moment, the sound of metal surrendering felt more real than the earlier silence. It was a sound that belonged to effort, not to waiting. That night, back in the barracks, the bell rang again, and this time he recognized it. Dinner. The mess hall served bean stew, cornbread, canned fruit, fixed portions, a line, no scramble. Men ate with the calm of people who had learned that nothing could be gained by fighting the line. At the next table, voices stayed low. "That sergeant wrote the date," someone said. "Why mark it?" No one answered. In the absence of an answer, people filled the space with rumors and quiet guesses. Enrico chewed slowly, tasting salt and starch, and listened for the bell as if it might explain itself. His eyes drifted to a notice board. In English and Italian, it listed rules: daily hydration times, 10 o'clock, 14 o'clock, 16 o'clock. If temperature exceeds 100 degrees Fahrenheit, 37.8 degrees Celsius, outdoor work will be suspended. The medical station assigns work types based on fitness grading. Report discomfort immediately. Words, regulations, things that could be pointed to. A person could stand in front of the board and argue with it, or he could obey it. Either way, it would remain there, unblinking. The hydration bells were the first rule he began to trust. When the loudspeaker clanged, even guards stepped into shade and drank. No one argued with thirst. In the shed, Frank timed their breaks by the bell and made them set tools down before they were careless. Enrico learned to watch for dizziness in the men beside him and to report it before a mistake became an accident. The camp did not call that kindness. It called it protocol. After dinner there was a brief formation. A translator with a bookish look read simplified labor terms, daily hours, work types, safety procedures. Then he raised his voice for a passage that made Enrico listen harder. Under the 1929 Geneva Convention, relative to the treatment of prisoners of war, the detaining power, the United States government and its military authorities, has explicit responsibility to maintain, care for, and pay compensation for the labor you are required to perform. Your labor conditions, hours, safety, and corresponding wage accounting will operate within this international framework. Any dispute regarding labor treatment may be submitted through designated channels, and it will be recorded and processed. Convention, framework channels, recorded, processed. The words sounded like metal parts that fit together. Enrico did not know whether to be relieved or wary. In Sicily, so much had depended on whim and temper. Here, everything insisted on being written down, and writing had weight. Then the camp commander appeared, a tall colonel with gray hair and a sharp gaze. He faced not only the prisoners, but also dozens of American guards and contractor representatives like Frank. His remarks were short, without flourish. "I know some of you came from the front and are used to solving problems the most direct way," he said, his voice steady in the dusk. "But this is not the front. This is a camp. The camp runs on rules and discipline, on respect for procedure. I state plainly, first, any form of corporal punishment or verbal abuse is prohibited. Second, prisoners of war are not entertainment. Any act of mockery or humiliation will be treated as misconduct. Third, Any dispute that arises in work between personnel or with contractors, the first step is to report it. The duty sergeant will record it, then it will be investigated and handled by established procedure. Order is not maintained by volume, it is maintained by executing the rules every time without exception. He dismissed them with a nod. The crowd broke apart with the quick efficiency of people who had learned that the end of a meeting was not a moment for debate. Enrico saw the same sergeant from earlier standing behind the commander, notebook open. When the commander said prohibited abuse and record disputes, the sergeant's pencil moved. He did not look up. Later, Enrico learned his name, Sergeant Masters. It fit him the way the bell fit the day. He seemed made for the camp's grammar. Days took on a hard-edged shape. Breakfast bell, start work bell, hydration bell, lunch bell, afternoon hours, dinner bell, lights out. Each point arrived precisely, like the meshing of a large machine. Enrico found inside that rhythm a strange steadiness. He knew when hunger would come, when water would come, when he must stop and step into shade. Someone checked the thermometer on schedule. The posted heat line was 100 degrees Fahrenheit. If the needle crossed it, work stopped. Even the sun had to answer a rule. He began to read the camp by its small procedures. At the tool return table, a guard counted wrenches and screwdrivers the same way every evening, eyes hard but hands methodical. In the kitchen, a cook sometimes added an extra spoon of beans, not as charity, but as if the ladle had found an allowable margin. Masters appeared when procedure might blur, when a contractor's demand rubbed against a guard's orders, when a dispute began to thicken in the heat. He would look, ask for facts, and move on, leaving behind a trail of notes that made people choose their next actions more carefully. One afternoon, after early release, Enrico found copper wire and a piece of thin sheet metal in the scrap pile. He spent his break bending, joining, and riveting until he had a crude wind direction chime with 3 tiny bells. He tied it under a small awning beam by the mess hall side door. It was useless, but it was his hands making something not listed on any board. The next day, the wind rose. Dry, strong desert wind swept through the camp and lifted fine sand. From the mess hall side door came a thin, clear tinkling, lively in its irregular rhythm. Enrico heard it on the way to work and slowed. The sound did not belong to engines or bells. It belonged to air moving and metal answering. Sergeant Masters came along another path, notebook in hand. He stopped, listened, and looked from the swaying chime to Enrico. No smile, no warning, only a measuring glance. Enrico felt tension prick his shoulders as if he had stepped outside a line no one had drawn for him. Masters spoke in his flat voice. The wind knows its direction. He paused. People should, too. He walked on toward administration, as if he had merely noted the weather. Enrico watched the chime turn and ring. The words stayed with him. The wind needed no permission to move. It moved because it was pushed. A person, Masters implied, should not drift on pressure alone. He should know where he was going, even inside fences. The thought did not comfort him, but it did sharpen him, the way the first sip of salted lemon water had sharpened his throat. A few days later, a young temporary hire, neither soldier nor long-term contractor, whistled at Enrico's work crew. The whistle itself was bored more than hostile, but when Enrico handed him a repaired gear, the young man nudged an empty oil drum with his boot so it rolled away, grinned, and said with a heavy local drawl, "Hey, you Italian boys sick of pasta, come here to play with scrap iron? This works harder than throwing your hands up and surrendering." Before Enrico could respond, a military police officer who had been stationed in the doorway shade stepped in and placed himself between the young man and the prisoners. Name, employment number. No inflection. Clipboard and pencil ready. The young man blinked. What? I was kidding. Name, employment number. The shed went quiet. Wrenches stopped mid-turn. The young man gave his name and a number. The MP wrote it down. The pencil scratched the paper with a dry hiss. Then the MP looked up. Under Camp Code of Conduct, Chapter 3, Section 7. Verbal humiliation or mockery based on nationality, race, or prisoner status is prohibited. Your statement is suspected of violating this provision. This incident has been recorded. Continue working. Next violation, your work authorization will be revoked and further action may follow. No shouting, no grabbing, only citation, record, and consequence. The young man flushed, took the gear, and walked away. The MP gave the prisoners a minimal nod and returned to his post. The line between the hire and the prisoners had been redrawn in ink, not in fists. Afterward, Enrico returned to his bench and forced his hands to keep moving. The work felt heavier for an hour, not because the insult mattered more than shells and bullets, but because the camp treated insult as a procedure issue, not a drama. He began to understand that words, here, had measurable consequences, that knowledge did not make him safe. It made the space around him legible. Later, the commander appeared near the shed and spoke briefly to the contractor lead and sergeant masters, loud enough to be heard. Work is permitted here. Opinions within rules are permitted. Complaints are permitted. Humiliation is not permitted toward anyone. Order is built by procedure, executed without exception. Then he left. Masters wrote a few lines. The shed returned to its noises, metal on metal, a belt squealing, a pump housing tapped into place. Yet something had changed. The humiliation had not been fed with argument. It had been dried out by procedure. It left no smoke, only a written entry. Time crawled into 1945. News in the camp arrived late and blurred like the world seen through frosted glass. The calendar turned, but the bells did not. The work stayed the same. Pumps, belts, oil lines, electrical checks. Enrico's hands grew more confident. He began to anticipate problems before they broke. He learned to listen for the pitch of a bearing and the feel of a frayed belt through his fingertips. Work had a brutal honesty. A part either fit or it did not. Then in spring, on an afternoon still hot enough to sting, the old wooden-cased radio in the shed began acting up. Static hissed until voices vanished. Frank slapped the cabinet and muttered that it was a relic. They pulled the set down, removed the back, and exposed dusty tubes and wiring. Frank shook his head. Contacts are oxidized. Coil might be failing. It costs more to repair than replace. He was about to scrap it when Enrico spoke, halting. Sir, maybe I can look. Frank glanced at Masters, who had appeared in the shed without fanfare, inspecting a tire shipment. Masters gave the slightest nod, as if the question was not permission but risk. Frank shrugged. Go ahead. Enrico did not know complex circuits, but he knew contact. The plates were filmed with oxidation. Spring contacts sat loose. He found fine sandpaper and a thin metal pick. He polished key points to bright metal, then adjusted springs so they closed tighter. He cleaned away dust, checked that wires sat where they should, and held his breath as if the radio were an engine that might bite back. They plugged it in. He turned the knob. Static, then less. He tuned with patient increments until the hiss dropped, and a clear male voice filled the shed with solemn cadence. Berlin's Reichstag has been taken. The red flag is flying. The European theater has reached its conclusion. Then came fragments of German broadcast, rapid and hoarse, and English again. Surrender, ceasefire, unconditional. Enrico's hand froze on the dial. Everyone stopped. Tools hung in the air. The Italians' faces drained. The Germans went gray, staring at the wooden box as if it had opened into a pit. American guards straightened, serious. No one cheered. No one spoke. The radio kept talking, its calm voice pouring facts into a room that did not know where to put them. Sergeant Masters walked over, footfalls heavy in the quiet. He looked at the radio, then swept his gaze across the rigid faces. He did not turn it off. He walked to the water barrel, set out for everyone, checked the lid, and then spoke in the same flat, familiar tone. Hydration time, everyone. In order. Enrico moved first. He took the shared metal cup, dipped water, and drank. The water was cool. The coolness slid down, but could not settle the cold fire rising in his chest. The war ending did not feel like relief. It opened an emptiness. If the war was over, what was a prisoner for? What came next? Repatriation, judgment, waiting. The radio had spoken a fact that could be repeated. Facts were supposed to anchor you. This one felt like it removed the ground. Camp life continued. Bells stayed punctual. Work assignments followed the board. Rules stayed posted. But the air held a new suspension. Prisoners whispered more often about going home and what home would be. Guards shifted toward efficient bureaucracy, as if preparing for a known end point. The camp became quieter in a different way, as if everyone had begun to listen for an ending that had not yet reached them. Then came August 1945. Arizona's summer burned at full force. News arrived again. Japan had surrendered. The war was fully over. This time there was no extra ceremony, only a meeting. The commander assembled prisoners and key personnel on the yard. He stood on a wooden crate. No loudspeaker. His voice carried in the heat. "The war is fully concluded," he said. "Under relevant agreements and procedures, this camp will begin consolidated head counts, file reconciliation, and subsequent transport and repatriation arrangements. This will take time. Maintain order and cooperate. Your labor and conduct record will become part of your personal file and will affect processing. Dismissed." In the following weeks, the camp became a document processing center. Prisoners were called one by one to confirm personal information, fingerprints, original unit identification. Clerks typed, stamped, and filed papers into labeled folders. Thick binders recording daily hours, job assignments, and incident reports or their absence were flipped and sorted constantly. The smell of oil in the shed was joined by the smell of paper in offices, ink, carbon copy, the dry rasp of files sliding into drawers. Enrico noticed how the camp's memory lived in ledgers. The day he drank salted lemon water and stood unshackled at a workbench had become a line somewhere. The days he tightened bolts until the wrench squealed had become numbers. Even silence became data. No reported incidents, no missing tools, no unauthorized movement. One afternoon, Enrico was told to report to administration. The office door stood open. Inside were the commander, a clerk sergeant, and Sergeant Masters standing by a window. "Corporal Rossi," the commander said, motioning him in. Several folders lay open on the desk, including Enrico's labor record. The commander pulled a standard envelope from a drawer, slid out a sheet, and handed it to Enrico. "This is a certification issued based on your record during your time in this camp," he said. "It states facts only." Enrico took the paper. Ordinary office stock, typed in 3 paragraphs. First, skills, competent in centrifugal pump disassembly, cleaning, assembly, and troubleshooting, light mechanical diagnosis and repair on Fordson and similar farm tractors involving fuel delivery, ignition systems, and drive belts, basic maintenance on GMC, CC, KW 2.5-ton Army trucks, including tire changes, electrical checks, and brake adjustment. Second, quantified record, Total logged hours, 1,287. Primary work site, maintenance shed 3. Equipment fault rate in the relevant reporting period decreased approximately 18%. Safety record, no reported incidents. Complied with established safety processes, including tool inventory, heat suspension protocol, and incident reporting. Third, assessment. Reliable mechanical handling ability, willingness to adhere to workflow, and sustained focus under repetitive tasks. At the bottom were the commander's rank, printed name, and a heavy signature in ink. Date August 17, 1945. Beside it, a secondary mark, smaller and neater, Sergeant Masters' abbreviated surname and identifying number. Enrico read the sheet twice. It did not ask him to be grateful. It did not accuse him. It did not attempt to tell a story about who he was. It treated him the way the camp treated everything that mattered, by listing what could be checked. The commander said, "Keep the original. A copy will be stored and transferred with your repatriation paperwork. Your wage accounting will be provided separately before departure." Enrico folded the letter until it became a tight square and put it in the inner chest pocket of his work shirt. Through thin fabric he could feel the hard edge of paper. It pressed against his ribs like a small plate of armor. As he turned to go, his eyes caught Masters. Masters did not speak. His gaze paused on Enrico's hand over the pocket. He gave the smallest nod and looked away again, as if the file had been closed. Outside, evening wind carried coolness. Enrico wandered until he reached the mess hall side door. The wind chime still hung there. It moved lightly, bells making a thin sound, nearly swallowed by the wind. He raised his right hand and touched, in sequence, his cracked lips, his forehead, and his right wrist. Water, fire, hand. The gesture was simple. It asked only 3 questions. Do you have water? Is your body steady? Are your hands free? In the camp, those questions had been answered by bells, boards, and officers. Now Enrico answered them for himself. The departure date was set. On the day of final property inventory, Enrico saw Sergeant Masters carrying the same light brown canvas bag, the one that had held the handcuffs, toward the quartermaster's office. The chalked 22 June 1944 and WR 784 were blurred but still visible. Masters handed the bag to an officer. The officer wrote in a thick ledger, then placed the bag into a metal cabinet labeled "Restraining Devices, Processed and Archived." The door shut and locked with a dull metal click. On the morning of transfer, dawn was a cold blue over the desert. Enrico looked one last time at the camp. Low barracks, straight roads, guard towers silent in the distance. The tiny dark dot under the mess hall awning still hung there. No wind, no sound. He climbed into the open bed of a transport truck. The engine started. The truck rolled out through the gate, crunching over the alkali crust. Enrico reached into his pocket and touched the folded letter. Then he repeated the gesture, fingertips to lips, forehead, wrist, water, fire, hand. The truck gained speed. The camp shrank in dust and vanished below the horizon. The road ahead was long, but for once the next step did not feel like falling into blank space. He had something to do at each moment. Check, act, continue. 1946, Northern Italy. A small workshop specializing in farm machinery repair. Enrico Rossi wore oil-stained work pants and crouched beside a broken harvester. His toolbox lay open, tools arranged neatly, each in its place. On the inside of the lid he had written 3 words in white paint marker, now worn where his thumb had rubbed them over time: Acqua fuoco mano. He checked the cooling line and water supply. He tested engine temperature. Then he took a wrench and set it firmly on a rusted bolt. The motion was smooth. His eyes held steady focus. The shop owner watched from a short distance and nodded, murmuring to the customer, "Rossi doesn't talk much, but his work is clean. He's on time. He doesn't cut corners. He's got his own method." Enrico did not look up. He was listening through his palms to the resistance in the metal, and the exact moment it gave way into a small, certain looseness. The desert wind was long gone, but the chalk on canvas, the posted hydration times, and the paper record of hours had become something he could carry, a repeatable check that anchored him to the next concrete action.